I often think about the first days in Babylon, a world so different from the streets of Jerusalem I had known, from the temple courtyards where my prayers once rang freely. The mind of a young man, shaped by the rhythms of devotion, ritual, and the quiet discipline of study, was suddenly thrust into a crucible of exile, power, and moral ambiguity. I was a stranger in a strange land, a boy from Judah placed in the service of a king whose language, culture, and values were foreign. And yet, in that very displacement, the core of my psychology was revealed, the interplay of identity, principle, and adaptive intelligence. Exile is not merely a physical state. It is profoundly psychological. To be uprooted is to confront the fragility of belonging, the tension between memory and adaptation, between loyalty to one's origin and the necessity to navigate a new reality. My mind became a landscape of dualities. The city of Babylon stretched wide and imposing before me, filled with opportunity and danger, while within me the city of Jerusalem, sacred, familiar, and formative, persisted as an inner compass. Every choice required negotiation between these two worlds, between the call of conscience and the pressures of conformity. Food, training, and rituals became the first frontier of this negotiation. The king's provisions were lavish, yet tainted with compromise. To partake was to violate my understanding of purity, to refuse risked offense, even punishment. My psychology adapted in the tension between fear and principle. I recognized early that moral clarity is not always safe. Standing by principle often entails psychological resilience, the capacity to endure dissonance, and the awareness that integrity may demand solitude. I began to cultivate patience, observation, and the art of subtle persuasion. I proposed a test, 10 days of vegetables and water, a simple experiment to see whether my body, mind, and spirit could thrive without compromise. The outcome was as revealing as it was affirming. Discipline, mindfulness, and moral consistency were not just ideals. They were practical, sustainable, and potent. From that early exercise, I began to see the architecture of my mind, one part anchored in faith and principle, one part attuned to the practicalities of survival, one part capable of discernment and strategy. Exile demanded more than mere obedience. It demanded psychological sophistication. I learned to observe the culture around me, to read the rhythms of power, the subtleties of hierarchy, the motivations of the privileged and the vulnerable alike. I discerned patterns in human behavior that others overlooked, the interplay of fear, ambition, envy, and loyalty, the unspoken currents that guide decisions in court, in council, and conflict. My analytical faculties sharpened not in abstraction alone, but in the practical context of survival and influence. Dreams became a central domain of my consciousness. In Babylon, visions, omens, and interpretations were currency of power. I recognized early that the ability to perceive meaning, to connect abstract symbols to tangible outcomes, was both a skill and a responsibility. The human mind seeks patterns, yet in the presence of divine revelation, this capacity becomes a bridge between perception and insight. Every dream I interpreted required careful attention to detail, acute observation of context, and a sensitivity to the psychological state of the dreamer. Yet it also demanded humility. Interpretation is never mere conjecture. It is the alignment of insight with principle, observation with moral and spiritual resonance. I remember the dreams of kings, of beasts, of empires rising and falling. They were not mere curiosities. They were mirrors reflecting the human desire for control, understanding, and foresight. My mind became attuned not only to symbolism but to human psychology, the fear of loss, the hunger for recognition, the tension between ambition and morality. I saw how dreams magnify anxieties, desires, and insecurities. Interpreting them required a disciplined mind capable of separating projection from truth, anxiety from insight, illusion from principle. In this, I discovered a central feature of my own psychology, the capacity for dual awareness. To navigate Babylon successfully, I had to perceive both the explicit and the implicit, the spoken and the unspoken, the temporal and the eternal. The tension of integrity and influence became a recurrent theme. As I rose in the king's favor, I faced subtle pressures, the expectation to conform, to participate in systems that conflicted with my values, to compromise my faith for expedience. I learned early that psychological resilience is often invisible. It is cultivated in silent negotiations of the self, in the quiet insistence on principle when conformity offers comfort and recognition. This resilience is neither rigid nor passive. It is adaptive. It allows flexibility in method without compromise in essence, strategic engagement without ethical erosion. One of the most profound exercises of my psychological and moral faculties was navigating threats to life. The lion's den, the intrigue of court, the envy of colleagues. These were not just external challenges, but internal tests of fear, courage, and faith. Fear is never absent. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the management of it. I had to regulate emotion while maintaining clarity, to prevent panic from distorting perception, to prevent resentment from clouding judgment. In these moments, I understood a subtle truth. Human psychology is strengthened not by comfort, but by confrontation with risk, ambiguity, and potential failure. The capacity to endure danger while maintaining principle, to anticipate consequences while acting ethically, to feel fear while acting courageously, defines a mature mind. Prayer became a psychological anchor. In a world that constantly demanded adaptation, observation, and strategic engagement, prayer was a moment of alignment. It was the conscious affirmation of identity, a reinforcement of principle, a calibration of thought and emotion toward a higher purpose. It was not merely ritual, it was cognitive reinforcement, emotional grounding, and moral consolidation. Each prayer strengthened the architecture of resilience, each supplication clarified intention, each act of devotion reinforced ethical and spiritual alignment. The ability to influence without coercion, to persuade without compromise, to guide without manipulation, became a hallmark of my psychology. Observation, interpretation, and subtle communication were tools of both survival and moral expression. I learned to understand the psychology of others deeply, their ambitions, fears, biases, and blind spots. Yet this understanding was never exploitative. It was applied to navigate ethical and relational complexity with integrity. Influence and insight were inseparable from accountability, discipline, and reflective thought. Isolation was inevitable. Faithful adherence to principle often positions one at the margins, creates subtle distance, and invites envy. I experienced loneliness, moments when understanding the mind of others felt simultaneously vital and isolating. The psychology of this isolation is nuanced. It is not mere solitude, but the conscious negotiation between belonging and integrity. One must engage with the world while maintaining moral and cognitive independence, a balancing act that requires acute self-awareness, emotional regulation, and the capacity for reflection. Ethical reasoning became a constant cognitive exercise. Every action, every decision, every interpretation carried consequence not only for myself, but for the community, the king, and the unfolding political and social ecosystem. I learned to weigh outcomes, anticipate reactions, and consider moral implications simultaneously. The mind that can integrate principle, foresight, relational dynamics, and emotional regulation becomes a mind of strategic depth. This integration is not innate. It is cultivated through reflection, experience, and disciplined attention to both internal and external signals. Daniel's psychology is a study in long-term vision. To live in exile faithfully requires seeing beyond immediate gratification, beyond the fear of punishment, beyond the desire for recognition. It demands awareness of cumulative consequence, the recognition that principle resonates beyond immediate circumstance, and the understanding that actions rooted in integrity reverberate across relational and temporal planes. My mind developed a temporal depth, each choice considered in light of historical consequence, relational implication, and ethical resonance. Resilience, insight, faith, and adaptability became intertwined. I understood that human psychology is multidimensional. It is cognitive, emotional, relational, ethical, and spiritual. To survive and thrive in a morally complex and politically volatile environment required the integration of these dimensions into a coherent self-concept and operational framework. My decisions were informed not solely by instinct or impulse, but by the continuous interplay of observation, principle, reflection, and anticipation. The psychology of fear and hope coexisted. Fear is inevitable. Hope is cultivated. The mind under threat develops heightened perception, but also anxiety. The mind aligned with principle develops foresight, courage, and endurance. Managing these tensions is central to the psychological architecture of resilience. I learned to anticipate danger without being paralyzed, to recognize threat without yielding to it, to act decisively without compromising integrity, and to maintain hope even when the outcome seemed uncertain. Dreams, prayer, observation, interpretation, and reflection formed the pillars of cognitive and moral development. Each pillar reinforced the others. Dreams sharpened insight, prayer anchored resilience, observation enhanced discernment, interpretation clarified principle, reflection integrated experience. Together, they created a mental architecture capable of navigating complexity, uncertainty, and ethical challenge. The dynamics of envy, ambition, and power around me revealed subtle truths about human behavior. I observed colleagues' manipulations, rivalries, and subtle coercions. I saw the mind's capacity for both loyalty and betrayal, fairness and exploitation. Navigating these dynamics required not only ethical clarity but strategic intelligence, empathy, and discernment. I learned to anticipate human behavior, to recognize emotional subtext, to read intentions without judgment, and to respond with both wisdom and moral consistency. Even as influence grew, vigilance remained essential. The higher one rises, the greater the potential for threat, both overt and subtle. My psychological strategy was continuous monitoring, reflection, and adaptive adjustment. Yet vigilance alone is insufficient. It must be balanced with faith, ethical commitment, and relational engagement. The mind that balances alertness with integrity develops both effectiveness and moral authority. Ultimately, the psychology of Daniel is the psychology of alignment. Alignment of thought, emotion, action, and principle. Alignment of cognition, morality, and spiritual awareness. Alignment of self with ethical and transcendent truths, even in a context of moral compromise and existential uncertainty. It is the cultivation of a mind capable of perceiving subtlety without cynicism, acting decisively without arrogance, and enduring adversity without moral erosion. Resilience, foresight, moral courage, and relational intelligence define the architecture of this consciousness. The interplay of fear and faith, doubt and trust, isolation and influence, insight and humility forms the rhythm of psychological life under conditions of both threat and opportunity. The mind grows, sharpens, and deepens under these conditions, producing a cognitive and moral sophistication rare in ordinary human experience. Even in moments of danger, when lions were near and conspiracies abounded, my mind maintained focus, my heart maintained hope, my spirit maintained alignment. Psychological strength emerges in these moments, shaped by reflection, principle, observation, and faith. The integration of cognition, emotion, morality, and spirituality allows endurance beyond immediate comprehension, insight beyond ordinary perception, and action beyond mere instinct. The psychology of Daniel also exemplifies relational discernment. Faithful engagement requires understanding the motives, fears, and desires of others without compromising principle. The ability to navigate human complexity while maintaining ethical integrity is central to both influence and survival. Strategic empathy, ethical calculation, and relational intelligence are inseparable from resilience and foresight. In conclusion, the mind of Daniel reflects the profound integration of intellect, ethics, emotion, and faith. It demonstrates the human capacity for endurance, insight, moral reasoning, relational sensitivity, and spiritual attunement under conditions of exile, threat, and complexity. Daniel's psychology embodies the balance between principle and pragmatism, courage and fear, isolation and influence, insight and humility, faith and doubt. It is a blueprint for navigating moral, relational, and existential complexity with wisdom, resilience, and alignment.